Benny from Wild Turkey, Campari, and Wilderness Trails. So let's get into it. How are you today?
Doing great, Patrick.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. I know first trip for this year to Houston, right?
Yeah,
You got a second one coming the end of the year.
first time in Texas this year,
Yeah,
but definitely not the last.
second last. Perfect. Well, if you would like to introduce yourself to our listeners, I know there's some people that are going to be watching this that know you, but for others who don't know you, who are you?
Yeah, so I'm Benny Hurwitz. I'm the portfolio ambassador for Campari Group's American whiskey portfolio. So, like you just mentioned, Wild Turkey Distillery as well as Wilderness Trail Distillery now.
And you've been a bartender before this, right?
Yeah, so cut my teeth in bars and restaurants back maybe 2009 ish. Started as a barback and kind of just worked my way up and was a bartender for most of my career still. Now I've been with Campari on the whiskey side for coming up on 6 years real soon.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I've known you since you started. Like I think we first met when you first started in this role 6 years ago. Yeah.
Definitely. I've covered Texas the whole time. I live in Los Angeles, but 6 years of coming to Texas almost 10 times a year pretty much between all the different major cities.
Yeah. So you said you started as a barback. Where'd you start as a barback? What area? What part of the U.S.?
Yeah, I started at this bar called Bread Soda in what they call kind of Upper Georgetown, Glover Park neighborhood of Washington, D.C. So kind of like a collegey neighborhood. And they were just a really cool neighborhood bar. A couple pool tables. They did like a ping pong night where they cover the pool tables and get like a lot of people coming in for that.
Yeah.
But just like straightforward drinks. This was, for at least for DC, this was a little bit before the real comeback of the classic cocktails. And I mean, it wasn't on my radar at all at that point, but I was just looking to learn how, not necessarily even how to bartend, but just get into the industry.
Yeah.
So barbacking was the best route for me.
And did you always want to be in this industry, or did you have like ambitions to be in another industry? And you just kind of fell into this?
Honestly, not that I'm not ambitious, but I just kind of go with the flow, I think.
Yep.
And I mean, I had pretty much been working in the same job that I had since high school.
Okay.
And I was just knew I didn't want to do that anymore. And I knew that you could make money in the bar industry to support yourself. And skateboarding is a really big passion of mine. So I would travel. I grew up in Maryland. I'd travel down to DC to skateboard because that's like in the it's city centric when you street skateboard. And just through my connections, actually the guys that owned Bread Soda were also skateboarders from like a generation before me. So they were like the cooler older guys that took me in and let me learn how to barback.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you started as a barback. When did you start transitioning to behind the stick and making cocktails?
Yeah, so it didn't happen there at the first bar. They didn't really have like a ton of shifts for me, but they were like, hey, if you come in and learn how to do it, I guarantee someone's going to call off every week and utilize you. Sure enough, I started getting like one shift a week just by covering. And another guy that was a friend of ours ran another bar called Bourbon, which was in the Adams Morgan neighborhood. It's no longer there, but he would come in and sit at the bar and kind of see me work and was like, hey, if you want like a more steady gig, you can come over to Bourbon. So I went over there and immediately got Friday and Saturday night barbacking.
Okay.
And then it was probably just under a year before I got my first bartending shift.
Okay.
And this was definitely like a more high volume turn and burn, also kind of party collegey neighborhood on the weekends. So.
Okay. What were some of the cocktails? What were some of the first cocktails you
Oh
made?
my gosh, no! I mean, it was all simple mixed drinks,
Just like vodka sodas,
whiskey cokes, vodka sodas, shots, and honestly, after that first night of bartending, I was like pretty overwhelmed because I'd gotten pretty dialed in at barbacking, and I loved it because in my previous life, I was actually managing a dry cleaner. So, like I mentioned, I started there in high school.
Yeah.
I worked my way up, became the GM of that. So I went from essentially running a small business and managing people and talking to people every single day to bar backing and not having to talk to people at all
Yeah.
and just working with my hands and hustling. And I just loved it. So when I went back to bartending and then went to bartending and had to start talking to people and interacting more and be busy and work with my hands, it was a little challenging at first, for sure.
Yeah. That's definitely an interesting transition from being in dry cleaning to bartending, but that's definitely makes sense for someone who likes skateboarding and wants to keep moving and doing all the things.
Yeah, I just wanted to be in the city. So, I mean, I was in my early 20s at the time, and I didn't, I was still living in the suburbs in Maryland where this dry cleaner was, and living in a group house with some buddies at like 21. And then a couple years later, I was like, I just have to go down to, I want to live in the city. I want to just, be away from the place where I grew up.
Yeah, I gotcha. So you went from red soda to bourbon. What was after bourbon?
Yeah, so bourbon, definitely should speak about that for a second. It's a really special place in its own for its time. I think bourbon opened around, it was before I worked there, of course. I think it had already been a bar, first called Blue Room. And that was definitely way more of like a club vibe. I mean, DC back in the day was definitely a lot more music driven than cocktail and food driven like it is today for a lot of different places. And Blue Room went from like party bar till then the same owner, but he decided to rebrand it because he was really passionate about bourbon and all whiskeys for that matter. So the original idea for bourbon was to just make it like an all-American bar. So all the food, all the wines, all the beers, and all the whiskey, of course. It was all American. So then, I mean, he was doing all sorts of stuff to pick barrels and things that, every bar that has a respectable whiskey collection and things these days try to do. And he was doing this before it was even a thing. So he was picking barrels in like 2006, I think, as early from Willett and other places down in Kentucky.
Okay.
So he's got quite a reputation. His name's Bill Thomas. And then he wanted to open another bar that was even bigger and really start to change the whiskey scene. And then that bar was called Jack Rose.
Okay.
So Jack Rose is still around now, well over a decade. And it's, one of the biggest spirit collections in the world. It won the award at Tales a couple of years ago for just that. And, he was the owner of bourbon. He brought in a beverage director that was going to be the opening director for Jack Rose. I started to learn from that person, Rachel Sergi, and she's the one that took me to Jack Rose and to open that in 2011. So that was the next step after bourbon.
Okay. Yeah. So you've always just been bourbon's kind of been your whiskey has kind of
Yeah,
been like your
even when
soul.
Whiskey's always been around me, even when I didn't really realize or even care too much about it. Still just really trying to learn more about the bartending side and just how to do it, the systems, work hard. That's just kind of like what my whole ethos is. Just do the job that's in front of you, So eventually, though, I got the passion and the itch to learn about it.
Yeah.
And then, that was the job that was in front of me. So I learned as much as I could.
So so you worked at Jack Rose, and then from Jack Rose you took the step into ambassadorship.
Yeah, there was one other little step in there that I definitely can't skip over because it was super impactful for me as well. So I ended up working at Jack Rose for 7 years, opened it, and pretty much started bartending there right away as well, 2011, all the way to pretty much like 2018, December 2017, I believe, is when I left Jack Rose. So I had been there for quite a while and kind of just hit a ceiling, as we do, what happens sometimes in this industry. I was the lead bartender there for several years, and it brought me so many amazing opportunities and so much support from the owners there at Jack Rose. They would send me to Tales and other cocktail festivals and help fund things like that, and like really help me learn about what was going on out in other great bars around the country. But like I said, just kind of hit the ceiling, wanted to do more, wanted to learn more. I felt like could always keep learning about whiskey there. There was always new whiskeys, but I just wanted to learn more about systems and operations and honestly just see other ways that people did things. And I was just fairly fortunate, I guess, because I had worked there for so long and kind of had a reputation that another bar approached me that's no longer around, but is Columbia Room. So I actually worked at Columbia Room for just only about 5 months. And that was because I started there. And shortly after then, the opportunity to work for Wild Turkey came along. So there's a little bit of a background on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it didn't just come out of nowhere. So I was working at Jack Rose, like I mentioned, going to different bartender festivals and events. And uh, two of the things that I really bought into and really changed how I did things and thought about things was Camp Run Amok,
Mm-hmm.
which is a bartender camping trip essentially, where you do the Bourbon Trail, kind of a bourbon immersion program and giant party and good time all at once. And you go to Kentucky for 6 or 7 days and you sleep at a little summer camp. And every morning you wake up at 7 a.m. and go to a different distillery. And then there's lots of other branded events and fun things going on throughout the week. So I did that. And then I also did Behind the Barrel, which is our program we do down at Wild Turkey specifically. So kind of a mini Camp Run Amok, if you will. And we work with the USBG to put that on. And we still do that today. So in fact, I went to Behind the Barrel before I went to Camp Run Amok in 2015.
Okay.
So that was the second year that Behind the Barrel was around. And back in that time, it was once a year for 30 people from around the country. You answer a couple like essay questions about your passion while you're in the industry, and got to go down to Wild Turkey in 2015, courtesy of USBG. So that was really great, and that's what actually started my relationship with Wild Turkey. So then fast forward back to years at Jack Rose, go to Columbia Room, and then one day I'm getting ready to go open the bar, and I get a phone call from some folks from Campari,
Mm-hmm.
letting me know that they're considering me to be the brand ambassador. That they had spoke with the Russell family, who's the legendary Jimmy Russell's been at Wild Turkey for coming up on 70 years this year. His son's been there 43. That's Eddie Russell, and father and son and grandson Bruce, one of my good friends. I'd interacted with all of them at this point, and they had been in talks with the folks at Campari, who ultimately pulled the strings, and they were looking at me to come down and work for the brand. Bruce Russell, who was doing the role right before me, so Jimmy's grandson, Bruce was the first national brand ambassador for Wild Turkey. He lived in Austin, Texas at the time, but they were ready for him to come back to Kentucky and start taking over the reins, and that was now over 6 years ago. So he's now just become associate blender, if you haven't heard, Bruce Russell.
Congrats, man.
Yeah, it's very awesome.
Yeah.
So he's been doing it for a while, well over a decade at the company. But that is how I got into it.
That's awesome.
But like I said, couldn't skip over the Columbia Room chapter. I mean, that was so huge for me. The things that opened my eyes to, just a very small team of people that are very like-minded, the really rigorous training process, and everybody just has to buy in. There's nobody works there that is cutting corners or doing anything, and it helps when your bar's only open 5 days. Everybody works every day,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's closed 2 days. So, but that was an incredible experience. That's a huge part of me still.
And then it's no longer around, you said.
Yeah, so pandemic, like many other bars, kind of took that one out, and it lives on now as a Death & Co. I don't know if you heard that, but they opened a Death & Co. in Washington, D.C., and it's in the original Columbia Room space. I haven't been, but they paid homage to Columbia Room. One of the most amazing things about that space was the tasting room bar in Columbia Room had this 20,000 tile mosaic that told the story of cocktail history, that was custom made and shipped over from Italy, and it was the entire backdrop of the tasting room bar. And they did have to cut it a little bit and move it, but they saved, I think, a piece of it or most of it in the Death & Co., which is really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool stuff. So talking cocktails, so did the bars you work at mostly focus on classics, or were you able to create cocktails?
I did a lot of cocktail creation. Almost so much where I was sick of it at times.
Yeah. Is there any cocktails that is there one cocktail that you were still working on that you weren't able to hit like the mark on or anything?
Not really. Nothing I could think of. I always just try to draw my inspiration from classics. And just like think a very common what most people do, food and other flavor combinations to inspire. But sometimes a lot of what I would do the kind of reverse engineer and really be stoked on a cocktail name and want to create the drink around that.
Okay.
Which that's one way to do it. But yeah, a lot of times it would be that, or depending on the menus we did had themes. So Jack Rose was a little more straightforward, but within Jack Rose we had a basement cocktail bar called Dram and Grain.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how Dram and Grain's operating, if at all, these days, because eventually it moves spaces to become its own standalone bar. So that was actually created by two guys that essentially pitched it to the owners of Jack Rose. So Jack Rose is humongous. I mean, it's like 4,000 square feet, 3 floors. First and second floor are like the same footprint, but then the third floor is a basement, and it's tiny. It's a 25-seat cocktail bar. Yeah. And it was just underutilized. Nobody was, we weren't using it. It was like maybe open on the weekends for overflow, but there really was no like system or flow or even like draw to get people down there, aside from the fact that we took them through a coded locked door and down some stairs, which obviously, back in 2014, that was pretty hot.
Yeah.
And two guys, Trevor Fry and Nick Lowe, they came up with the idea for Dram and Grain to give this space its own identity and do really experimental, forward-thinking cocktails and make like this reservation only space and limit the amount of guests so that they could cater to everybody and do things like how they wanted.
Yeah.
So they created that, and then I kind of worked my way down in Jack Rose. So it sounds funny, but started on the top floor, which is 3 spaces in its own. So a rooftop terrace with a retractable roof, 20 draft lines, cocktails, signature cocktails, classic cocktails, but really high volume. So once 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock hit, you're making a vodka soda, Jack and Coke, an old fashioned, a Boulevardier, like all crazy rounds, and of cocktails and just beers and shots all at once. And then on either end of that roof bar was 2 other bars, satellite bars. One was called the Balcony Room. It had sliding glass doors to separate it, so it worked as a PDR as well. And also had its own 5 draft lines, bar, cocktails, whatever. And then on the other end of the roof was a bar that was almost like a terrace, a separate terrace that looks off the back of the space. And they called that the Tiki Bar. And that was like all tropical drinks. So that was the top floor. So I started up there. I worked up there for like the first at least 3 years. And at the time, 2011 till 2014, that was when, things were still like more party driven, music driven before cocktails had kind of taken over. And then eventually that trend kind of shifted. People started to get a lot more interested in the cocktails and the whiskey selection that we had downstairs. So, when we opened Jack in 2011, we had 1,000 whiskeys. So like people were overwhelmed to even go there. And then a few years later, as it started to get more draw and that collection grew even bigger, I also got more interested, so made my way down to that bar. And then from there, I was like, all right, now I want to learn all this cocktail stuff that they're doing and start working with these guys down in Dram and Grain. So went and got work with Trevor, and then a guy named Lucas B. Smith, who still does operations, runs the Line Hotel in D.C. now, and does all their cocktail creation. He's probably doing some of the most innovative things in the country, if not the world. And working with him and a couple other guys, Andy Bigsby, Mikey Barton, and later some really great ladies as well. We all learned from each other. It was really incredible. And I went from being the new guy to eventually being one of the leads, and then mentoring other people, which was really awesome. So long-winded answer for your question, but made a lot of cocktails and a lot of menus and a lot of stuff that creative and outside of the box and thematic, like whatever you can think of.
Yeah. Was there any cocktails that you like? Was there one cocktail that you really really gravitated to that you were proud that you came up with?
Yeah, so there's one that comes to mind right now, and I called it Two Pink Flamingos, and I think I was the first person to do this. And again, this is like an intimate, dark cocktail bar, but basically I served a rum-based strawberry banana flavored Ramos gin fizz in a pink flamingo koozie, like pool floaty koozie, with a pink flamingo straw.
Okay.
Hence two pink flamingos, and it had a. We used to do this thing a lot. I'm sure people do this all over, but like we used to do this thing where we would infuse spirits and then blend them with other spirits or amaros or liqueurs and create like an ingredient. And instead of saying this cocktail has 5 things in it, we would just take that 5 things and make it one thing, which you're essentially batching and maybe infusing with something else, and then make up a name for it. So I basically made this thing, I called it Strawberry Banana Amaro.
Okay.
And it was strawberry infused Campari blended with banana liqueur. Okay. So pretty simple.
Yeah.
And then that was kind of like the bulk of the sweetener in the Ramos. And it was essentially like a Ramos build. And then it used a dark rum. And yeah, lemon lime, egg white cream, all that stuff.
That's cool.
But it was really cool. It was pink. The koozie floaty was pink. The straw was pink.
Yeah.
Kind of had a fun name. People see it go out. And that was part of a menu, I believe, that was inspired by cities.
Okay.
So I think that was part of like Miami or something. I can't remember
very,
exactly.
very
yeah.
Okay.
So, but that's a drink that I always really stoked on and still am because I just really like strawberry. I love strawberry banana. Like as a kid,
great,
strawberry banana yogurt, strawberry banana smoothies. So this was like the adult version. And then of course, like who doesn't love the Ramos and how it looks with the lift and like lift would be awesome on it. It would be pink as well, which looked really cool. And actually, there was one thing I did to make it a little different. I think I was using albumin, like egg white powder, instead.
Okay.
And I would use way less of it than you would put if you put like an entire egg white, but it still worked really great.
Interesting. Yeah. I've never tried dried egg white before in a cocktail.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it worked really great.
That's cool. Awesome. Is there any other notable cocktails outside of that one? Is there another one?
What's another one? I can think of some of the ones that the other guys made that were pretty crazy.
What was the other crazy one?
Because they were a pain in my ass at times. Love you guys though.
Yeah.
So Andy one time made a drink that was a riff on a swamp water.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So which is like just basic, like I think it's just green chartreuse, pineapple, and lime. And so he took those elements, but he drawing the influence. So the same menu actually, because this was one of the New Orleans cocktails. Okay. So that was another one of the cities on the menu, and it was he used alligator meat and he cooked it down and rendered the fat. It's a very lean meat, so you don't get like a lot of oil or fat off of it like you would bacon, but he followed that same principle to make an alligator fat wash green chartreuse. And then I think he added a little chinar to it. Like it wasn't just that pineapple lime. There was other layers and things, but I don't remember all the exact ingredients or recipe for that one, but that was pretty crazy. And people, you tell somebody there's like literally basically alligator in this cocktail. They're like, what? Okay, well, I'll try it. I'll trust you. Yeah, he would cook it down with spices and stuff too. So it had like Cajun spices. That was another thing that kind of gave it that nod to New Orleans.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a dope one. Yeah, what else? I think one of the most famous cocktails that actually stayed through on almost all the menus, and then even on one of the final menus, we like reinvented it and like changed the cocktail, but it was a nod to this cocktail that had literally been on forever. So essentially it never left.
Okay.
And it was one of Trevor's drinks. It was called Ode to Omaha.
Okay.
And this was like still fairly early, I think, when people were new to smoking cocktails. So that was another big thing that caught people's attention. So again, back in like maybe 2014 or whatever. This cocktail was a rum-based old fashioned with a strawberry cinnamon syrup, and it was just pretty much a strawberry rum old fashioned that was smoked. But the way that we served it was like in this glass orb
Mm-hmm.
with a cork. So you served it in that, swirl it around, and present it, and the guest poured it over the large rock and the rocks themselves. So it kind of gave that little extra interaction.
Yeah.
And I mean, those things are now like all super common, but I think back then that was like, I mean, that was the most popular drink for years. It has like articles written about it in DC and stuff. So
Yeah, the smoke cocktails are super popular.
they still are.
They still
Yeah.
are. I think it's one of those things that's not going to go away either.
Yeah.
That's cool. So talking a little bit on still continuing cocktails. So did you ever hit that phase of when you first started bartending, you wanted to put as much things in a cocktail as you could, and now you're developed into like the 4 ingredient classic cocktails where yes, you can do really cool stuff with just like minimal ingredients and figuring out how to take those ingredients and enhancing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely guilty of making the 8 ingredient cocktail that just tastes like cocktail. But I think actually pretty early on, even still back at Dram and Grain, I got sick of that.
Okay.
And it worked out because I had other guys that worked there that were making really unique, amazing things, but sometimes needed to be toned down. And then maybe I would want to make things that were a little too simple, and maybe they needed to be a little more complex
Yeah.
to be more original and unique for the space and the concept. So we really balanced each other out, I think, where I'd be like, dude, there's too many things in this or whatever.
Yeah.
And then in mine, they'd be like, oh, maybe it needs a little bit of this, you know? So I think we really balance each other's out. And I think that overall for longer, I've definitely been more the proponent of less is more.
Yeah.
And if I was back in a bar now or owned a bar, I mean, I would probably just do classic cocktails.
Yeah, don't mess with classics because they're designed to be the way they are.
Yeah.
Even though some do need some rebalancing, but otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I really took away from Columbia Room as well. So that was later in the career. I'd already kind of been shifting back towards simplicity. But one of the things that Columbia Room did that like changed the way I thought about it was like you weren't allowed to, so you could make a dealer's choice, but it had to be a classic.
Yeah.
So like if somebody came in and was like, I want something spicy and this or bitter and that, like you couldn't just like, I'm going to grab this tomorrow and this juice and just make it up as you're going,
Yeah.
which is a lot of what we did at Dram and Grain. It was a lot of off the cuff, like almost 9 times out of 10, people are getting a drink that we've never made for anybody else ever.
Okay.
Like it was, you're essentially experimenting on someone,
Yeah.
and they're paying money for it.
Yeah.
And that's what they said at Columbia Room. They're like, we don't experiment on people. We're going to give them something that's like tried and true, and we're going to pay attention to all the really small details. So make sure the glass is really cold, the drink is really cold, it's shaken hard, right? Like it's served right away. Just all the things that make the drink really good besides the flavor and the drink itself, all the other elements to make sure everything's perfect. Then the drink can be really simple. Like I can't tell you how many times I blew someone's mind with an Army Navy at Columbia Room when they just wanted a gin citrusy drink. And I'm like, gin, lemon, orgeat. And they're like, whoa, this is, and the Nick and Nora was frozen. You know what I mean? The drink was shaken hard with good ice and just tastes great.
Is this where the the 4th Regiment cocktail? That's where you kind of grew your
Yeah.
for it?
So yeah, that's a cocktail that that I'm a big fan of, and I order when I'm out and around. And if anybody doesn't know, it's essentially a Manhattan riff. But Columbia Room, one thing they would do sometimes would be to tweak classic recipes slightly. So I don't know if this is like the original recipe, but we made it 50-50, rye whiskey and sweet vermouth, and we used Italian sweet vermouth, and then 1 dash each of Angostura orange and celery bitters.
Yeah.
And it's just way brighter than a regular Manhattan, even though it has more vermouth.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe that lends to that, but this I think is really like the orange and the celery bitters just made it pop, and it was like a almost refreshing stirred drink in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then I think it got a lemon or an orange expressed on it, which also helps that. And that was a drink that I learned there. It was super simple. Make it good, stir it right, get it cold glass, and that thing is delicious. And that's a drink I order still when I go out.
Yeah, that's awesome. So kind of transitioning now, so since we've talked about cocktails, let's talk a little bit about ambassador.
Sure.
So we've established you're been a bartender. You're still bartending nowadays. When you get a free chance, I know you do a lot of cocktails for Campari too, with Wild Turkey, right?
Yeah, so I don't get to bartend anymore. Just Campari's pretty cautious about that with serving people and laws and things. We don't want to ever get in trouble, so they prefer I do not bartend. And obviously, I don't ever bartend at a bar or for money.
Right.
But even at events and stuff, they don't really have us even bartend our own events, which I wish we did. I miss it honestly every day. I spend almost every day in a bar, so I'm just like missing it, seeing my friends working when it's busy and just watching the magic. But we do still get to do a lot of cocktail creation. So yeah.
Okay.
So I'm still pretty hands-on, making drinks at home, or maybe I borrow someone's bar space during the day, But yeah, get to create stuff, work on other projects, things that go into cocktail kits. We work with some other like third-party companies. I'm actually working on a cocktail kit right now. I don't know if I can talk about it, but something that'll come out and I think be sold in liquor stores and things.
Yeah, that's cool. So what does your day kind of look like on average now as an ambassador versus bartending to now? What does your week look like?
Yeah, so it varies depending on where I'm at, and I try to reserve time throughout the week to stay on top of my administrative duties. So there's a lot of emailing, a lot of expense reports. I mean, I'm sure people hear brand ambassadors say that type of stuff all the time because you find people want to find out how you got into the role, what you do, and it looks really fun all the time. So we're always like, well, you have to do this, this, and this. But typical day, I mean, I'm on a computer and phone calls all the time. And then when I'm traveling, it's a lot more like out in the field. So a typical day traveling is probably like the more typical day as you'd imagine for a BA. Wake up in a city around 8 a.m., meet up with our local sales teams as well as our distributor partners anywhere from 10 to 11 a.m., either for training, account visits and meetings, or lunches with accounts and buyers and stuff. And then the biggest focus of my job is really education around the brands. So I'm in a lot of bars and restaurants doing staff trainings. That's like my bread and butter. That's my favorite thing to do. I think a lot of people know me or see me on social media and like see me skateboarding or whatever, and haven't necessarily heard me talk about whiskey. But that's what I love to do. So as soon as I'm in a bar and it's my turn to talk, and I just turn on, that's what I love, and I just get in the zone and try to wax poetic about these brands. So that's what I do the most of. That's my favorite thing to do, and that's a lot of my day to day. So I just came from a staff training at a steakhouse here in Houston. An account, and it's really cool too. What I love about it too is there's always varied levels of knowledge, so I'm able to tweak my presentation if I'm talking to a bunch of servers that look like they're in college and they don't really this is not their main gig, or this is not what they're going to do forever. So I want to make this sound cool to them. I want to get them excited about it. I want, when they taste the whiskey, for it to taste different than it's ever tasted before, because now they think it sounds cool because they've heard the story. They understand a little bit of how it's made, and they're like, damn, I didn't even know bourbon was whiskey sometimes. So they got all the way from that level all the way up to working with high-end bars, spirit bars, cocktail focused, and of course whiskey bars, where typically they know the most and want to know the most and need to know the most, because they have, nowadays, whiskey bars, even on a small level, have hundreds of offerings. And when someone comes and sits at the bar, hey, what do you recommend? You know what I mean? So I have to cater to each one, and that's what I'm doing most of the time. It's just working in bars, educating, talking about whiskey.
How much traveling do you do for this role? What would you say your percentage of
Yeah,
on the
so
road versus being back in LA?
it's about 50-50 now, I believe. We tried to get it down to that. It's always actually been 60-40. So originally like 60-40, but then it could be more some years. And that's really not like at any specific cadence. So for example, I could be gone 1 week in a month, or I can be gone 3 weeks of a month, or I could be home a whole month, and I could be gone a whole month. So it really kind of fluctuates throughout the year. And then certain months will be super busy. At certain times of year will be a little slower. I think when we get towards the end of the year, it slows down near the holidays, and then also right at the beginning of the year. So I'm usually home, most of December and January, and then February you start to pick up. But yeah, that 50% now is pretty much split between my focus markets, as well as all the big trade festivals. So like your Tales, your Portland Cocktail Weeks, your Run Amoks, Behind the Barrels. I go to all of those. And then our own company meetings and conferences. So we have an annual all company meeting. We have our function breakout meetings that we travel for. And then sometimes I have to go to New York where our headquarters is to work on stuff.
So you work pretty line on line with the sales team, and so your education also extends into working with the sales force.
Yeah. So I mean, not just bartenders. When it comes to our whiskey portfolio and brands, I have one counterpart, Joanne Street, also one of my best friends. She and I do the whiskeys together. So anybody who gets hired for Campari, or anybody that works with our distributor that is new or is in one of our trainings, they learn from us. Yeah,
that's cool. What do you most enjoy about being a brand ambassador? What has been kind of the highlight of your job so far?
Yeah, my favorite thing about the job, I think, is honestly, like I said, just talking about whiskey. Because it doesn't matter if I've been out super late the night before, or I just had to get up at 4 a.m. to take a 6 a.m. flight. As soon as I get into that bar and it's my turn to talk, everything goes away. Yeah. And you just all that, it gives me energy, it gives me life. So I think just literally talking about our whiskeys and really just the category in general, when I educate, I focus on our brands, of course, so that they understand what makes our brands different from other brands. But I really try to educate people on the whiskey category, bourbon and rye whiskey specifically.
Yeah. That's awesome. I know your name has kind of become synonymous with Wild Turkey in the industry. So anytime we talk about Wild Turkey, oh yeah, Benny. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. It's funny because that's kind of how I got the job. Yeah. Is at least in DC. So I went to Behind the Barrel in 2015. Then the next year they expanded the program and they decided to bring people back, and they called it being a mentor. So I went back the second year, and it was essentially like I was a camp counselor. Mm-hmm. And then the third year they asked me to come back again, and I was really surprised, and I was even tried to turn it down because I didn't want to take a spot from somebody else. I'd already been twice. And they were like, no, we're growing it even more. It's not just once a year anymore. We're going to do it 4 times. So I was like, oh, okay. I'll come back then. Okay. So I'm going to be one of 12 mentors that year between 4 different sessions, 3 per session. So I didn't feel like I was like taking a super coveted spot of one of 30 people. It was now like 120 people were getting to go through this program. So I was like, okay, I'll come back a third year. Yeah. So by doing that, I kind of forget where I was going with this thought.
It's okay.
Anyway,
yeah,
we can edit it.
Yeah.
What were we saying? Something about
your
favorite part. Talking about So I finally I was like, all right, I'll go back for a third time back to Wild Turkey. So I kind of developed this reputation and association with Wild Turkey is what we were saying. So basically, I'd go back to DC, and then our local Campari person there would be like, hey, I'm sponsoring the USBG meeting this month with Wild Turkey. Do you want to be the one that talks about it? And I'm like, I don't even work for the company, but I've been there 3 times, and I work at Jack Rose. All we do is talk about whiskey. Hell yeah, I'll do it. So that's how I started to get that association on the local level. And then, like you said, obviously now traveling all around the country, I've been doing this for 6 years with the brand. So I've definitely, or hopefully people associate me with Wild Turkey.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's go ahead and talk about the product now. Let's do some education for people. So if you want to kind of give us a rundown of, I know we don't have any Wilderness Trail, but if you want to talk about Wilderness Trail first, we can talk about that and then get into turkey. What would you like to talk about?
Yeah, either one. I mean, I'm looking at these Wild Turkey bottles. We could just start there.
Okay.
So, Wild Turkey is one of the legacy bourbon distilleries. When you think about bourbon, you should definitely think about Wild Turkey. Just like Beam and Makers, Heaven Hill, Buffalo Trace, Old Forester, Wild Turkey's one of them. We're one of the biggest bourbons in the world, and we're sold almost all over the world as well. So, Wild Turkey itself as a brand has been around since 1942. So 82 years now. But where our distillery is, down in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, it's been a distillery since the 1860s. So not dissimilar from a lot of other distilleries in Kentucky as well that have this history and connection. Whether or not their brand itself goes back that far, there's usually been distilling on those properties and old warehouses. And Wild Turkey's no different. We have a warehouse that's 130 years old. Built in the 1890s, and it houses over 14,000 barrels that still go into these products. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we have that same history. And then also, Wild Turkey really has a great family behind it. So, for those of you who probably know Russell's Reserve Bourbon, that's named for the Russell family, Jimmy Russell, Eddie Russell, his son. Jimmy started there in 1954 when he was still basically a kid, just about 20 years old, and Jimmy's still alive and working, so he goes to Wild Turkey on a weekly basis. I've seen him there every time I went last year. Jimmy will be 90 this year, and he's been at Wild Turkey for 70 years on September 10th. So, huge legacy there. Jimmy's considered the longest tenured master distiller in the world currently. And then his son Eddie Russell started there in 1981, so he's been there over 40 years himself. So father and son, over 100 years experience making Kentucky straight bourbon and rye, all at Wild Turkey. They've never worked anywhere else, basically. Mm-hmm. And then, like I mentioned, Bruce has now been there over a decade. He's in his early 30s, and he's going to take the reins eventually, He chose, when he was able to kind of come up with his title and work with the folks at Campari and explain what he does, he actually decided that he should be called a blender as opposed to a distiller. Okay. And I think that was really cool of him. And he knows what's going on. He's really transparent. I think in Jimmy's day, a lot of stuff was a lot more secretive. How you make the whiskey, your mash bill. Like, I'm not even going to say the mash bill because this is being recorded. But honestly, nowadays you can find this stuff online pretty easily, right? So Bruce is just a lot more transparent. And to him, he's like, I don't want to be called distiller. That's not what I do. I work with the final product. So it's really cool. And he is the associate blender now, like I mentioned. So awesome family behind this brand, which people don't often realize, They might see Wild Turkey and remember that was, their grandma's favorite bourbon, or their crazy uncle brought that to Thanksgiving, or their crazy aunt, or maybe they were that crazy uncle or aunt. Or maybe they drank some Wild Turkey when they shouldn't have been drinking at all. So I think a lot of people know that and know the brand, but don't realize the vast history, tradition, family, and everything that's behind it. Yeah,
that's awesome. And what about Wilderness Trail? I know it's the most recent.
Yeah, Wilderness Trail is really, really cool stuff. It's actually a brand that's been on my radar pretty much since day one for them as well. The distillery was founded in 2012. So it's just over a decade old, it's a baby, when you talk about Wild Turkey that's been around for 80 years, and a lot of these other brands that are over 100 years old. Wilderness Trail is pretty much brand new, but obviously if you're in a different business, if your bar hits 10 years old, that's obviously a huge achievement, right? Yeah. So, I mean, they're new, but they're not, and their story is really cool as well. So it's two guys that met in college, both Kentucky natives. Both went to college in Kentucky. They met actually playing in a rock band. I believe it was specifically like a metal band.
Okay.
So pretty rad guys, but also very, very intelligent, science-minded guys. So you got Pat Heist, who got his PhD in plant pathology, microbiology, and then his partner Shane Baker, who's an engineer. These two guys started their first business venture together in 2006
Okay.
with a little company called Firm Solutions. So that's FERM, short for fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys are essentially yeast suppliers to different parts of industries all over the world.
Yeah.
They've had this company for 18 years now. But in 2006, as they're building it up, they're selling yeast off to fuel alcohol producers, kombucha producers, beer makers, and bourbon makers for that matter, and all sorts of spirits distilleries. So through that, they kind of, you could say they went in the back door into the industry by starting this fermentation company, using their expertise, their knowledge of the science of it, and created this business that, again, to this day, still operating. They're supplying over 1,000 yeast strains to like over 500 different producers.
Okay, cool.
So it's huge. And not something you've really heard of unless you've heard the story of Wilderness Trail or if you make alcohol in some form.
Yeah.
So these guys did that really well. And what happened kind of early on, I think, is they were selling yeast to different folks. A lot of times they would get the call when something goes wrong. So whether or not it was the yeast or something else in the process, the yeast would kind of get the blame. And these guys would, either get on the phone or even probably go into a facility to kind of figure out what the issue was. Mm. So they got to do a lot of troubleshooting. And they essentially put together, their long list of do's and don'ts of what would we do if we opened our own place.
Yeah.
So then, eventually, 2012, they decide to start Wilderness Trail. And they basically cherry-picked some of the more rigorous and complex methods that are also a lot more costly in a lot of cases throughout the bourbon process. To make Wilderness Trail what it is. So when you think about it, bourbon's super regulated by our government. It's one of the most regulated spirits in the world. It's even slightly more regulated than single malt scotch. So I'm pretty sure it's the most regulated of all the whiskeys. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to make your bourbon unique, obviously you probably start with your mash bill. What's going to be our ratio of grains? And then, what type of yeast will we use? Obviously, these guys know a bit about yeasts, so I think they kind of knew what they were going to do there. But then as they learned about other methods and techniques, they choose to do a sweet mash process as opposed to the traditional sour mash. Mm. They've figured out a way to shorten their fermentation time. They figured out a way to cook the grains at a cooler temperature to save energy. Then after they ferment and then they distill the product, they actually distill lower than the legal maximum and they barrel at a much lower proof than the legal maximum as well. So where, bourbon by law can't be distilled over 160, with Wilderness Trail, we distilled about 138. Okay. And then where bourbon can't go in the barrel above 125 proof, Wilderness goes in at 110. Okay. So, fun fact about that: before 1962, I believe, the legal barrel entry proof maximum was 110. Okay. So they're kind of calling back to the old way bourbon was made there. So they do that really low barrel entry proof. But what that tells me, and what that really does for your product, is one, it's going in at a lower proof. Alcohol is a great solvent. It's extracting stuff from the barrel constantly. So the higher the proof you go in the barrel, the faster it can extract stuff. So when you put it in a lower proof, at least how I always describe it to folks is I say it's extracting a little more gracefully. It's aging more gracefully. It's a little lower. It's a little softer in there. And then ultimately, once your product ages, it's going to come out of the barrel at a lower proof. So if you go in at 125, you could come out at 135. You could come out at 140, right? Just depending on how long it ages and where it ages in a warehouse. Yeah. But you go in at 110, it can only get so high. So then our final products, they're all bottled in bond, so they're 100 proof, and they don't take nearly as much water to get down to that 100 proof because they don't go in the barrel as high. So that's how they do the bourbon, and then the rye whiskey actually goes in even lower. So again, these are just methods that you could say actually are also more costly, because if your product comes out at really high proof and you water it down, guess what? You end up with more bottles.
Yeah.
So we sacrifice yield in volume to actually yield a more flavorful whiskey. And the same thing can be said about Wild Turkey as well. We do lower barrel entry proof there too.
Okay.
So again, that goes back just same tradition, the older ways. Jimmy Russell's been there forever. And then Wilderness Trail calling back to that as a new modern distillery.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, you know, the barrels we're using over at Wilderness, as well as the grains, everything is really choice. We do a longer seasoning on the barrels than kind of average.
Okay.
So we're doing up to 18 months stave seasoning,
Mm.
which is pretty awesome. That allows that wood to really leach out the tannins and get a bit sweeter.
Yeah.
And the grains are all grown in Kentucky, which sounds super small and crafty, but Wilderness Trail is huge. Like,
Yeah.
we're the 14th largest bourbon producer now, and we're doing about 4.5 million proof gallons a year. Got like 200,000 barrels.
Oh, wow.
So like, it's not small, but we're doing it in a very small craft focused way.
Yeah.
So the mash bills as well are kind of unique. We're doing slightly lower percentages of corn as the primary grain in bourbon, and rye for that matter. But then in our bourbons, we have higher percentages of rye and wheat, respectively, because we have a high rye bourbon and a wheated bourbon. So, you know, the corn is a little cheaper than the rye and the wheat. So it's a little more costly if you use more of that. So they kind of, like I said, they cherry picked all these things that they thought would make a premium product, and it really shows. And on top of that, you know, they're all bottled in bond. So that's another set of regulations that we have in place. Bottled in Bond Act of 1897, right? So that ensures the spirit is made at one distillery in one distilling season by one master distiller, aged in government-approved warehouses for at least 4 years, and can't be bottled above or below 100 proof.
Yeah.
So they follow all those laws, but the big one for us is that it's made at one distillery. So with all the bourbon craze over the last decade and a half and all these new brands that are out there, you know, a lot of those brands, they might build a distillery and they might source some whiskey to get a product in the bottle so that they have something to sell while the whiskey they make is aging. But if you source from somewhere else, you actually can't call it bottled in bond because it's no longer from one place. It came from another place and now it's at your place. So bottled in bond to us really is that statement that we made this whiskey from scratch, and that was really important to them. That's something that we continue on. And on top of that, you know, this product is still made, like I just mentioned, we have a lot of barrels and we're making a lot of spirit. But we still make all of our core Wilderness Trail products in batches of like 20 to 25 barrels at a time.
Yeah.
And all of our products are also non-chill filtered, which is just another one of those cherry-picked things that the bourbon enthusiast looks for, and makes the product premium. So bottled and bond, they are all 4 years old. Bottled and bond can be older, right?
Yeah.
But also one of the laws that states one distilling season. That means if a bottled and bond's 4 years old, it's all 4 years old. If it's 5 years old, it's all 5 years old. If it's 10 years old, it's all 10 years old. Because it all was made in the same 6 months or so. Yeah. Versus, say, Wild Turkey 101, there's a couple things that actually disqualify it from being bottled and bond nowadays. So again, bottled and bond, not necessarily like make or break means your thing's better. Yeah. For Wilderness Trail, it's that statement again, we make it ourselves, we're really proud of that. And you can't put that on the bottle otherwise. And it's also a huge achievement to make a whiskey from scratch and wait 4 years before you sell it.
Yeah.
But at Wild Turkey, when we make something like Wild Turkey 101, the first thing, of course, is it's 101. It's not 100 even, but that's actually easy to change with a little more water.
Yeah.
But the other big thing that makes Wild Turkey different and disqualifies it from being bottled and bond is the fact that we actually combine multiple ages in that product. Okay. So that's not all made in one season, let alone 1 year. So in Wild Turkey 101, we combine 6, 7, and 8-year-old barrels of bourbon. Yeah. So, but that's what makes Wild Turkey, gives it that great flavor. Yeah. So if it was all 6 years old, it probably wouldn't taste quite the same. Yeah. So bottled and bond, not the make or break means your whiskey better, but it does mean a lot when you're a new distillery and a craft distillery or independent distillery. Like, it's a big statement. So that means a lot. And yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot there to make this product really cool. And these guys, like I said, they're kind of known as the science guys of bourbon. They've been troubleshooted for other bourbon distilleries and other types of spirits, beer, you name it. So they've kind of seen it all, and they got to create this brand and these whiskeys the exact way that they wanted to.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. So the brand came on my radar when it was very new. In fact, so just through working at Jack Rose and our owner and his relationships, and he's visiting Kentucky every month.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's for a barrel pick or to source out some vintage whiskey or whatever. And he met Dr. Pat, I believe, back in maybe 2016 or 17. So I was still working at Jack Rose. And as the story goes, Bill got to taste Wilderness Trail before it even had a bottle, a label, a design, or anything.
Yeah.
Like, I guess he tasted it out of a barrel visiting there and was like, this is incredible. This is awesome. I love your story. All the methods you're doing align with what I think a great bourbon should do. And the thing is, like, at Wild Turkey, we do some of that stuff. Other distilleries do some of that stuff. But we're a lot more traditional at Wild Turkey.
Yeah.
And obviously, we have time on our side. So we have lots of great aged bourbon to use in our products.
Yeah.
Wilderness Trail doesn't have that same time. So though the product's younger, leaning into some of these other methods really helps not only the flavor, but just premiumize the product as well.
Yeah.
So Bill was down there that's like, this is great. I love everything you guys are doing. Can you please bring this to Jack Rose for me? I'm doing a charity event. We'll like debut it. And they're like, well, we don't even have a packaging for this product yet. It's not out or nothing. And he somehow convinced them to get some up there anyway. So I was bartending this event, and I met Dr. Pat, and probably Shane was there as well. Dr. Pat's hard to forget because he has a really long beard.
Okay.
And a thick Kentucky accent. But he's a scientist and he's super smart, and you're just like, you start listening to him talk and it just like mesmerizes you. And I got to meet those guys in like 2017, I believe. And Jack Rose, I believe, might have been the first place that Wilderness Trail was ever tasted outside of Kentucky. And then shortly after, once they had a brand, a label, and a product out there, they start selling it in Kentucky, and the first place they sell it after that is DC and Maryland. So it ends up in Jack Rose pretty much right away. So again, this is a brand that's been on my radar since the beginning, more or less.
Yeah.
And just everything that I know about whiskey and I like in whiskey, I agree with all the stuff they do, and I think this product is really, really cool. So, yeah, got to try that early on. And Wilderness Trail, like I said, it's just really special. It's unique. It's new. It's very science driven. And I think if you're a whiskey enthusiast, so if you're on Bourbon Reddit or other blogs or listening to podcasts, you definitely know about Wilderness Trail. And if you're a whiskey focused bartender working in those type of specific bars, you probably know Wilderness Trail. But now that I'm working on the brand, I'm definitely learning that the general bartender doesn't know about Wilderness Trail. So that's really what my job is to get that word out there, and not just like neighborhood dive bar bartenders. I mean, even at some of the best cocktail bars in the world, they haven't heard of Wilderness Trail yet. So
that's awesome. Well, Benny, thank you for coming in tonight, or this evening, I guess we should say now.
Yeah.
Where can people follow you at on Instagram if they want to ask you more questions or follow up on anything?
Yeah, Instagram's a great place. At Benny Bourbon 101, no spaces or dots or anything. No underscores, just Benny Bourbon 101.
There you go. Awesome. And then today's point is strawberry, Campari, and banana are a good combo. So that's our closing statement for today.